Just imagine if the West provides longer range missiles, the West provides the aircraft, the West provides other really more powerful weapons, and Ukraine manages to inflict some humiliating defeats in a couple of front areas, perhaps in the Crimea, then the popularity of the regime would crumble. And I think the next 3 months, running to the 15th, 17th of March 2024, as this voting in Russia will continue. I think next 3 months, Ukraine will try to use some kind of humiliation tactic.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio. I'm James Hansen, and today we're talking about the war in Ukraine with Dr. Vlad Mykhnenko. Originally from Ukraine, Vlad is an associate professor of sustainable urban development at the University of Oxford, who specialises in geographical political economy. Vlad, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to Frontline.
Thank you, James. Thank you for inviting me.
First of all, I just wonder, and particularly speaking as a Ukrainian, what your assessment is of where we are in this conflict as we begin 2024.
Yes, I mean, over the last 5 days, Ukraine have suffered quite a barrage of missile strikes. We know that Russians have fired about 500 missiles and drones over Ukrainian cities, hitting civil infrastructure as well as probably some military installations. We know that at least 70 people were killed and over 360 were injured. And we also know that about $1.25 billion US dollars worth of missiles were spent by Russia in the effort, which of course on the one hand is horrific in terms of casualties and general terror that it creates. On the other hand, looking at spending $1.250 billion in 5 days doesn't look like a sustainable way of fighting a war. So
that's interesting.
There is some positive message there.
No, and that is interesting because I was going to ask you whether you think what we've seen in recent days, which really follows Ukraine's strike on Belgorod, with Putin's forces sort of retaliating with strikes on Kyiv and Odessa and Kharkiv and Lviv, you don't think that's sustainable?
I don't think that's sustainable. And also, I think the tempo of the war itself has been slowed down to such an extent that if we take kind of the last 2 years as a guiding line, and the tempo of the capturing Ukrainian territory by Russian troops, at the moment they control about 18% precisely of the Ukrainian territory, of which about 11% were conquered in the last 2 years, since 24th of February 2022. And I've been doing just maths. If this continues the same kind of speed of occupation, it should take Russia probably 15 years and 3 months to capture the rest of Ukraine. And also, if we are projecting the current casualty rates of 361,500 Russian soldiers, it will take not just 15 years and 3 months, but it will take an additional 2.7 million losses. So overall, to capture Ukraine at the current rate of attrition, Russia would need to spend over 3 million soldiers killed and severely wounded. So I think that's an important measurement of how the war is proceeding at the moment from the Russian kind of side of things.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I want to come back to both the Russian casualty rates and the timescale for this war in a moment, Vlad. Just in terms of what we're seeing on the front line at the moment, obviously recently Russia captured the town of Marinka. They continue to try and encircle and capture Avdiivka. Are you confident that Ukraine can resist them and hold on to Avdiivka over the winter months?
If you've seen the pictures from Marinka, which is effectively a destroyed, a completely erased town, there's nothing left there, not a single building, not a single tree, not a single car, not a single human being. It is impossible to defend a barren land. So the Russian strategy, as we have seen in Solidar, Bakhmut last year, and now at Marinka, and now in Avdiivka, is effectively level the city and not to enable people to defend it because there is nowhere to hide effectively. And if that continues, of course, it's impossible to defend Avdiivka because they will just level it and there'll be no potential way of repelling those attacks. So to some extent, I'm not confident that it's possible to defend it if Russia continues to use artillery at the same rate, the same tempo, the same speed as we've been doing now. At the same time, of course, we are talking about Marinka is a pre-war town of 10,000 people. There are 33 million people in Ukraine. Yeah, and if you're spending, a third of a million soldiers to capture a little bit of territory, it will take you, as I said, many millions more to capture the rest of it.
That's really interesting. So you think operationally maybe we're reaching the point where it's just not in Ukraine's interest to defend Avdiivka for much longer?
I think operationally it's important to remember that capturing, defending, liberating is good for us to discuss in terms of kilometers, miles, percentage of territory. But the war is fought against the opposing force, and effectively the aim of the war is to kill as many enemy soldiers as you can, and to kill more of them that you have on your own side. So to some extent, defending Kiev is effective as long as Ukrainian forces inflict as many casualties, proportionally more casualties than they effectively suffer themselves. So each of these towns are important in a way of allowing the Russians to use their mid-storm infamous tactic of throwing human waves on suicidal missions to attack, and Ukrainians effectively machine gunning them as much as they can. I think in that way, every little town and little city in eastern Ukraine is important for that precise reason of destruction of the enemy forces.
I'm glad you raised the Russian casualty rate, because it's a conversation we've been having a lot on Frontline in recent weeks, Vlad. And everyone I ask, is there a tipping point where Russia cannot sustain the casualty rate that it has at the moment? And most people say, well, there might be a tipping point, but it's probably several years to come, because they simply are a population big enough, and Vladimir Putin has enough of a disregard for human life that he is able to keep feeding Russian men into the meat grinder, as it were, using them as cannon fodder. Do you agree with that?
Uh, on one hand, we've been all shocked and surprised and disbelieved that losing 361,000 soldiers would not actually deter you. And the most recent announcement by the Russian dictator over Christmas and New Year celebrations was that he will intensify the attacks. He will not stop the war until Ukraine is destroyed and annihilated. And exactly as you said, he tried to project the image that there is these countless numbers of soldiers he can mobilize. I don't think that is the case, and I don't think they will be able to continue this machine for a long time, because remember that Russia lost about 1 million people during COVID-19, which is one of the top 5 largest casualty rates. A lot of those people were young, not all of them were elderly pensioners. Russian demographic situation isn't that great. And also, just 6 months ago exactly, the head of the UK Chief of Defence Staff, Admiral Rodakin, was under oath. He was giving evidence to the British Parliament on the 4th of July 2023. And he said to the Defence Committee that by that time, Russia had lost 50% of the combat effectiveness of its army. So that was 6 months ago. If you project an extra year, 2024, by the end of 2024, if nothing happens, Russia would have lost all of combat effectiveness of its army, unless they manage to replace it at the same rate, which I don't think is possible, because we mentioned the personnel casualties, but also we could mention other types of losses. Almost 6,000 tanks, 329 aircraft, 324 helicopters, 23 warships, 1 submarine was lost as well. And this is fighting a country which doesn't have a navy. So those losses are not possible to recuperate so in such a tempo. So I think there will come a time. I don't know when we don't know the time frame of this, but we're not talking about 15 years and 3 months. That's definitely is not the time frame I'm looking at. I think 2024 is the vital year.
On the flip side, I suppose, Vlad, there are also issues around troop numbers for Ukraine. Where do you think we are with that? I know Zelensky said before Christmas that he would have to look again at trying to boost the numbers, conscription, etc. Where do you think we are with Ukraine's troop numbers?
Yes, it appears that Ukrainian military is asking for up to 500,000 troops of extra mobilized soldiers over a time frame of presumably 2024, 2025. Some of it to replenish the losses, and I think Ukrainian losses have been maybe half, maybe 1/3 of the Russian losses in terms of the personnel. So we're looking easily at 125,000 lost, or maybe even more than that, maybe half a million soldiers lost. So Ukraine is, at least according to President Zelensky, 450 to 500,000 soldiers. And now they are trying to put through the legislature a new mobilization law that will kind of tighten and also tighten some of the um, restrictions on who is allowed or not allowed to join the army, and also will try to entice also younger people to join up, because, as you know, the average age of Ukrainian soldiers is not as old as mine, but it's kind of in mid 40s. So that is surely a problem.
And maybe there is another area where Western support can really play a role. I mean, there's so much focus on military aid in terms of weaponry, but actually the training that the West can provide. Obviously, there has been a lot of training already, but you know, when you look at the caliber of Russian troops, and very often they're people who've been conscripted on the front line. There might be ex-convicts, might be migrants who've been conscripted with very little training. Ukraine has an advantage there, particularly if that Western training continues.
Absolutely. And here the West needs to obviously increase the numbers quite dramatically. I think Britain has been trying to train about 50,000 a year. So if Ukraine needs 500,000, we can't wait for 10 years for them to be going through the British training camps. Other countries also step up, but we're talking about sort of 10, 20, 15,000 people. Uh, and, and hence you need to improve the training and the facilities, to increase the facilities across NATO members in Europe generally, to try to train Ukrainian troops there, because it's impossible. Well, it's very dangerous to train them inside of Ukraine because of the Russian missile strikes, and the whole country is visible, and hence any concentration of troops or trainees will be immediately hit by barrage of missiles. So that's here Western effort is important, as you have correctly said.
On the time frame of the war, Vlad, how do you see this playing out? I spoke yesterday on Frontline to Dr. Patrick Bury from the University of Bath, who said we need to be getting into the mindset of expecting this to last well into 2025, maybe 2026, and we need to be preparing a weapon supply program to last that long for Ukraine. Do you agree that that is the time frame we're looking at for this conflict?
I think it's absolutely necessary to look at the longer time frame, not just because of the Russian-Ukrainian war, but the general Russian aggression against the West. Because in President Putin's terms and in the Russian political establishment terms, this is the Russian war, or the Russian defensive war or preventive war against the West, general the West, and hence they're planning to attack other countries after Ukraine is finished or conquered, and hence the West needs to not just replenish millions of shells already spent, but needs to start preparing for potential higher intensity conflict. This has been intense conflict at times, but it's not the same intensity as even the First World War. The Ukrainians and Russians spent as many shells as the German command spent in one particular day in 1917 in terms of its attack. 3 million shells the Germans spent in one day, and this is about the same shell expenditure that Ukraine and Russia used in 2022. So this is an intensive war, but it could be even more intensive, and hence, everybody needs to set up. And remember, 1990s, 2000s, 2010s were the peaceful times. All the military has been dismantled, all the military production has been dismantled, all the kind of boogeyman of military industrial complex, as we now know, doesn't exist, because you can hardly produce enough, even the minimal requirements for a medium intensity war. So obviously, all the Western countries need to step up. Yes.
And clearly, we would all hope that this war finished tomorrow with a complete Ukrainian victory. But if it is still going on in 2 or 3 years' time, is there a sense that actually that might benefit Ukraine more than people are necessarily talking about at the moment? There is almost this sense that if the war drags on, that's to Putin's advantage, because he can increase the pressure for peace talks, for some kind of ceasefire, for some kind of negotiated settlements about the occupied territories. But perhaps Putin's strategy is to increase attacks, as we've been seeing in recent weeks, on Ukraine in 2024, hope for a change in the administration in the White House in 2024, and push for peace talks then. And he can't necessarily, particularly with the Russian casualty rate, sustain this conflict into 2025, 2026, 2027.
I would agree that the last 5 days have been like a desperate move of trying to compensate for the loss of the big warship Novosibirsk, which was hit just before Christmas in Feodosia in Crimea, one of the Crimean ports, and that was quite humiliating, almost excommunicating, and losing the Black Sea flagship missile cruiser Moscow, back in 2022. So this has been kind of a desperate retaliation attacks. And I agree that there is a certain strange dynamic here, spending so much missiles, or we shouldn't have. We know that some of these missiles were produced just a couple of months ago. So we're not talking about some stockpiles. The stockpiles are being used. Some of the missiles were produced last quarter of 2023, so they are fresh from the kind of production line. Hence, they are spending exactly what they're producing, which is not that great a number given the size of Ukraine. Of course, casualties rates are horrible, but we need to keep the sense of perspective. I think 2024 is vital for Putin because he wants to at least maintain the current status quo until the US presidential elections, until inauguration of the next president, exactly 12 months from now. So I think 12 months for him is a crucial time. He wants to use, to stabilize the front line as it is now and try to control it, trying to repel Ukrainian attacks, of course, thinking that maybe lots of things will change. And remember, 2024 will be quite a crucial year because I think half of the adult population in the world will be voting in various types of elections. I think 8 of the 10 most populous countries will have elections. We'll have elections in Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, US, UK, European Parliament, many other countries, over 70 countries will have elections. So there's quite a big electoral year, probably the largest festival of democracy, if you can call it. And hence, it's important for him to kind of play the strong card and try to maintain this kind of image of a strong leader who doesn't buckle and doesn't feel any pressure and performing well under it, which I think is a facade, is a mirage, which needs to be kind of prickled and needs to be opened.
Yeah, there are so many elections this year which could, in one way, shape, or form, affect what's happening in Ukraine. Obviously, the American election, European Parliament elections, and the EU support for Ukraine is something that's hotly debated. Even the Taiwan elections, whether that triggers any conflict with China and whether that affects Western support. So there's so much there. Just on an election we're not really in any doubt about its outcome of, the Russian election in March, even though we know Putin will emerge as, quote unquote, the victor, why does he care so much about it? Why is he so fixated on how it is presented when we know that he will declare himself the winner?
I think on the one hand, a lot of people who studied Putin for many decades believe he has some sort of he likes tradition and conservative tradition, and strangely, elections having this kind of procedural process every 5, usually be 4 years actually under President Yeltsin, and now he's extended to 6. Having that sort of legitimation kind of festival or legitimation show, I would say, is important to him to show that he's still loved and he's still the majority of people support him. And I think for him personally, it's important to play his personal legitimacy card or his personal popularity card against the elites, right? Because all these people, the sharks certainly around the Kremlin, also trying to sniff some blood. And I think he needs to kind of use this to some extent have an extra pillar of support. You cannot sit on the bayonets, right, for a very long time. You cannot just rely on suppression on the level of oppression, the police, secret police, army. You can just use that as your main, pillar of support. You need some kind of another pillar to stabilize this. Otherwise, you'll be totally dependent on security service, on security apparatus, on spooks, and on police, right? So he needs to have that sort of legitimation. I wouldn't say it's legitimacy, but some kind of figures, 70%, 80%, 90%, just to show that he's still loved, quote unquote, by the Russians to control part of his elites. Because remember, this is a very extremely one of the 6 most extremely unequal countries on earth. 500 families, about 1,400 people, control more wealth in Russia than 80% of the population. So 500 families have more wealth than about 115 million people. So these people want to protect their wealth, obviously also to augment their wealth. And hence, he needs to also be there as a guarantor of that. And hence, he needs some kind of support from the populace, from the people, to also kind of play some cards against the elites as well. Because this is not the one-man dictatorial regime. It's a system. He is a figurehead, important figurehead, but there are other people around him.
And is there any sign that you see, Vlad, of some of the oligarchs, some of the people who control the wealth and the power in Russia turning against Putin? Have you seen? I mean, obviously, we had last year, we had the attempted mutiny from Prigozhin. There was a lot of talk about that. Since then, it would appear as if Putin has gone a long way to restoring his authority. But do you see any signs of some of the oligarchs turning against him?
We had a lot of rumors about internal quarrels in the Kremlin, about some parts of the elites trying to persuade him not to stand again in 2024. And I think the reason he decided to stand again in 2024 is exactly he understands that the moment he's removed from power, his days will be over. And hence his personal physical life depends on hanging to that presidential post. But I think other people will have other, definitely thinking different ways. How much, the cost and benefit analysis of having Putin on, as your ruler. I think it's a continuous calculation. At the moment, the front line is stabilized to some extent. At the moment, they managed to find ways to get around the Western sanctions, and hence some oligarchs even returned to Russia, right? Some oligarchs from London returned to Russia. So at this moment, it looks like they're consolidating around Putin. But just imagine if the West provides longer range missiles, the West provides the aircraft, the West provides other really more powerful weapons, and Ukraine manages to inflict some humiliating defeats in a couple of front areas, perhaps in the Crimea, then the popularity of the regime would crumble. And I think the next 3 months, running to the 15th, 17th of March 2024, as this voting in Russia will continue. I think next 3 months, Ukraine will try to use some kind of humiliation tactic, and hence Belgorod attacks as part of that to create this, to destabilize this kind of the facade of stability and everything is normal in Russia. The restaurants are full. Friends of mine in Kiev said restaurants are full in Kiev as well. It's not as if the people of Kiev are all terrorized and sitting in bunkers every day. They're not. They're sitting in bunkers during the missile attacks, but otherwise life goes on. And as far as I understand, Kiev is quite a full city now. The lights are on, and maybe it's not up to 3 million of pre-war population, but it's definitely 2 million are back. So it's a kind of continuous strange calculus of war that we need to keep noticing.
I want to come on to the mood in Ukraine at the moment in a moment, Vlad. Just on Western military aid, obviously we're waiting to see what Congress in the US agrees in terms of renewed military support and when that might come through and how much it might be for. But so many people focus on the numbers or indeed the squabbles within American politics over it. Specifically, what does Ukraine need?
I think the head of Ukrainian General Staff, General Zaluzhny, Vitaly Zaluzhny, has written this fantastic long essay in The Economist, a British weekly current affairs magazine, in which he listed, again, second time already, listed the things, the kind of weapons that Ukraine needs to change the dynamic on the front line. I think they've mentioned, of course, loitering munitions, the kamikaze drones. They mentioned artillery, shells, ammunition. They mentioned electromagnetic warfare system to suppress the enemy drones. They mentioned, of course, longer range missiles like the German Taurus and the American ATACMS, long range missiles. Also, Ukraine is expecting aircraft delivery of F-16s and other potential fighter jets, which will be an incredible boost to its power. Also, Ukraine is considering a 10-year deal with the UK and Norway to increase its warship capability in the Black Sea fleet. As you know, grain exports are now kind of allowed by Ukrainian ability to deter the Black Sea fleet, the Russian Navy in the Black Sea, which has escaped or gradually escaping to the Russian ports, away from Ukrainian ports. And hence, that's an important bit as well. I would say, and this is probably needs to be discussed now, we need to talk about the medium range theater ballistic missiles, the one that can reach over 1,000 to 3,500 kilometers. Because Russian missiles are launched from aircraft flying 2,500 kilometers away from Ukraine. It's impossible to destroy those airfields without any capacity. and hence to stop this incredible terrorizing daily attacks by missiles across Ukraine, you need to have a longer range uh, capability of that. And I think theater ballistic missiles, 1 to 3,500 kilometers, is exactly what Ukraine needs to deter Russia from doing this ever again.
Vlad, I just want to take you back to what you mentioned a moment ago about your conversations with friends in Kyiv and what the mood is there and how life has, to a large extent, returned to what people used to recognise as normality. Obviously, you are from Ukraine originally. What is your sense of the mood at the moment in the country?
The mood is still of defiance. Obviously, 2 years in, it is a long war. It's a difficult war. 1/3 of the population is displaced. The current estimate we have probably 33 million people in Ukraine out of 40 plus before war. Probably about 7 million refugees across Europe. So obviously, the family has been torn apart. There is, women and children are away, men are at home. So it does create quite a difficult period. Also, the constant attacks create a very unstable business environment, right? How are you going to do business in a place like that? I know that Kiev is the most protected city because most of air defenses and anti-missile defenses are around Kiev, given that seat of capital city, seat of government, court, parliament, it's all there. And as the economy looks in Kiev, it looks, back not to pre-war, but Ukrainian economy has grown by 5.5% last year. And this is back from minus 29% in 2022. So the economy is gradually recovering. Kiev's, life in Kiev apparently looks almost normal, apart from the obviously sirens and alerts. But other cities are not as protected. So you have a lot of cities that are closer to the front line, which are closer to Russia, which are bombarded every day by actual artillery. Kharkiv, Kherson, Zaporizhia, they're under continuous attacks, and they're big cities of almost a million people or thereabout, and Kryvyi Rih as well, and hence those cities need to remain, to continue normal life. They need more air defense and anti-missile defense. I think in terms of practical needs, you need to stop the terror attacks, and hence you need air defense, anti-missile defense to allow people to return to those cities and to allow businesses to kind of recover and try to do what they're best in doing business. So I think that will help Ukraine to continue in its effort. There are good news. I think the tax receipts in 2023 were 27% up. Ukraine has been able to spend more on defense effort. Currently, I think 60% of Ukrainian government fund spending is on war, 40% on social needs. Social needs are covered by foreign aid. All of this 40% is actually of the budget is foreign aid. 6% is what Ukraine can raise in tax, and it spent all of it on the war effort. So it is obviously quite an attritional effort. We know that Russians are now increasing their war-related spending to 40%. The economy of Russia is 10 times Ukraine, so they have more money to play with to spend on all those war-related goods. But there are positive signs, and I think lots of people returned, and the economy is kind of slightly recovering, and hence that needs to continue. And for that, we need more and more air defense, anti-missile defense, and of course other types of weapons.
Vlad, really, really appreciate your insights and your analysis. Thank you so much for joining us today on Frontline.
Thanks, James. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for watching this episode of Frontline for Times Radio. For more on the war in Ukraine, subscribe to the Times Radio YouTube channel. Listen to Times Radio on your digital radio, or you can read the Times online with your digital subscription or in print. Thank you and goodbye.